Forgiveness has a lot of misconceptions and myths to it. Let me tell you a little bit about Matthew and Amanda. So they were stuck, and Amanda was angry with Matthew and would bring up the same offense over and over again. They would work on their relationship, and things seemed to go better for a little while, and then she'd remind Matthew how he'd hurt her, and he'd say, "Why do you want to bring that up again?" Well, Amanda did have a point. About a year earlier, Matthew had talked about how he went home to visit some friends, and he met a girl that he knew in high school, and they slept together. I mean, Matthew hurt Amanda, and he was willing to do anything that he could do to make it right. But when something came up that reminded her of the situation, she would attack, and Matthew was tired of hearing about it. And Amanda was just having a very hard time letting go of the hurt. She felt that if she forgave him, somehow it would be condoning his actions. And so my wife Michelle and I spent a lot of time talking to them about forgiveness and about trust. And there are a number of ways that forgiveness can be misunderstood, and it gets in the way of the healing process. So let me give you 5 myths. Myth number 1, forgiveness is a feeling. And I hesitate to bring this one up. Ideally, we want to move past all the feelings of hurt and resentment and anger. And when we totally forgive, we don't want them to bother us. So is forgiveness a feeling or not? I know that when I have completely forgiven someone, the hurt or the anger or the resentment, I just don't feel anymore. The actual offense, it becomes just kind of like another fact to me. I don't get triggered by it anymore. But I'm not sure that thinking about that end result helps me to get through the process. So I tend to think of forgiveness as a decision. It's something that I decide to do. You give up your right to get even and to hold somebody in your debt. You can decide to forgive by working through all of the hurt and the anger. And you decide to forgive by not holding on to the pain anymore, but working on processing it so that it doesn't bother you anymore. Myth number 2 is that you can't feel angry or hurt. Just like Matthew, we've heard many couples say, I thought you forgave me. Why do you keep bringing it up? And it's tempting to ignore your pain and dismiss it under the guise of forgiveness. The problem is, if you dismiss it too quickly, it keeps coming up to the surface, and it can last for a long time. It doesn't go away. So we talk to couples about how forgiveness is a process, and the danger is either getting stuck in the anger and resentment or dismissing it. And none of them lead to freedom. Myth number 3 is to forgive and forget. This can be a form of dismissal, just forget about it. I mean, isn't that the godly thing to do? So we've run into couples that have tried to do this, and we often see some type of a resentment that doesn't go away. And the offender feels great about it because they don't have it brought up anymore. But the one that's offended risks getting shut down emotionally. And over time, it's difficult to feel feelings of love that aren't tied to some kind of obligation. And love then doesn't grow when you feel trapped or obligated to do it. And so when you've processed the pain well, you can think back on the offense, and it just doesn't come with any corresponding anger or resentment. It feels like just another fact or something that happened to you. Myth number 4 is that forgiveness excuses the wrong. Amanda was stuck on this one. She felt that if she forgave Matthew, it was condoning what he did. So if she forgave, it was like saying that it was okay. And nothing could be further from the truth. Forgiveness doesn't excuse the wrong. It isn't about letting go of the offender's responsibility, and the offender may have to live with the consequences of the offense. So forgiveness does not give the offender the right to continue in their hurtful behavior. So when we talk about couples, we like to separate forgiveness and trust. Forgiveness is about letting go of the hurt. Trust is about showing that you are trustworthy. And the two are different topics. But to restore a relationship, they may go hand in hand. Myth number 5 is that forgiveness is a one-time event. In Matthew 18, Peter asked Jesus, how many times should he forgive? And Jesus basically said, over and over again. And I used to think that this verse meant that if someone kept hurting me, that I should keep forgiving them. And maybe that's one way to look at it, but I think there's something deeper here. I think that if you have a big offense, that you may need to decide to forgive that offense over and over again, and it might take you some time to process through it. And so every time you feel the anger and the hurt, you may have to remind yourself that you've forgiven that. Think about Amanda. An affair is a big offense, no doubt about it. And there may be a lot of hurtful and painful thoughts that she'll need to forgive. And these may come up again and again. And she's going to have to decide to forgive again and again. I mean, that doesn't mean that she should trust Matthew. Again, trust is a different topic. But if Amanda and Matthew do want to renew their connection, Amanda will need to decide to forgive. She may need to process her hurt many times. Processing her hurt may take some time, and she may need to decide to do it over and over again. So, tips for marriage mentors. Recognize that forgiveness is a process. In big offenses, a hurt does not necessarily go away immediately. And every time that thought comes up, you have to decide to forgive again. Tip number 2 is allow the hurt and anger. It's okay to be hurt and it's okay to be angry. That's part of processing the pain. You just don't want to stay there. Eventually, you got to let it go. And tip number 3 is to separate forgiveness and trust. And we found that when we're talking to couples, they tend to combine these two. And we like to separate them. So forgiveness is one action, and there are things you can do to work through forgiveness. And trust is another action, and there are other steps that you can do to work through and rebuild trust. So we like to separate those two. So those 3 tips again are: recognize that forgiveness is a process, allow hurt and anger, and separate forgiveness and trust.